Attachment is a subtle force. It begins softly, almost invisibly. A small pull towards something or someone that brings you comfort, validation, or joy. At first, it feels innocent. You tell yourself you care, you are connected, you are simply investing your heart. But slowly, that attachment begins to weave threads around your perception. What was once clear becomes clouded. What was once a choice becomes a need. The mind begins to blur the line between love and control, between care and dependence. And this is how blindness begins. When attachment grows, awareness shrinks. The moment you become overly attached to a person, you stop seeing them for who they are. You begin to see them through the lens of your own desires and fears. Every word they say becomes a signal. Every silence becomes a threat. You interpret rather than observe. You assume rather than understand. And so, instead of relating to a living being, you start relating to the image you have created of them in your mind. This image is shaped not by truth, but by attachment. Attachment creates a kind of hunger. It feeds on validation and attention. It whispers that you are incomplete without the other. And once that belief settles, the blindness deepens. You start chasing illusions. Moments that once gave you peace, gestures that once made you feel seen, the idea that if you hold on tighter, things will return to how they were. But holding on does not bring closeness. It suffocates what could have grown freely. When you cling, you block the natural flow of connection. You replace understanding with expectation. The energy of attachment is heavy. It binds not only your heart but your perception. You begin to justify what hurts you, defend what confuses you, and ignore what your intuition quietly tries to reveal. You call this devotion, but in truth, it is fear disguised as love. Fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. And fear, when hidden behind affection, can blind even the most intelligent mind. It convinces you that the tighter you hold, the safer you will be. Yet the tighter you hold, the more you lose your sense of balance, and the more the other person withdraws. In this blindness, you start to live from reaction instead of reflection. You check their messages, you count their words, you measure their presence. Your peace depends on their attention. When they turn away, you panic. When they return, you breathe. Your emotions become a pendulum, swinging between hope and despair, dictated not by truth but by your attachment to outcomes. In this state, clarity cannot exist, and without clarity, there can be no authentic connection. True vision requires detachment, not indifference, but the ability to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. Detachment allows space for truth to surface. It lets you observe your emotions without being consumed by them. When you are detached, love becomes a choice, not a need. You no longer grasp, you give. You no longer chase, you attract. Detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of awareness. To see clearly, you must first loosen the grip of your own expectations. The one who is attached looks outward for confirmation, always asking, do they still want me? Do they still care? But the one who has found balance turns inward and asks, do I still honor myself in this connection? Do I remain true to what I value? Attachment pulls you outward, awareness brings you home. When you are blinded by attachment, you confuse attention for love, habit for connection, and comfort for compatibility. You start to believe that peace will come once they change, once they return, once they finally understand. But peace does not come from them. It comes from the release within you. The willingness to see what is without resistance. Only then can you distinguish love from illusion, truth from projection. Attachment also hides itself behind good intentions. You say you just want to help, to care, to be there, yet beneath those words, there is a subtle fear of being left behind. You cling not because the bond is strong, but because your identity has become entangled with it. You have forgotten who you are without them. This is why walking away, even when necessary, feels unbearable, because your sense of self has been built upon their presence. But if your peace depends on another, it is not peace. It is dependency wrapped in emotion. The blindness of attachment distorts timing as well. It makes you rush, chase, force, and demand. It cannot tolerate uncertainty. It craves constant reassurance because it fears the unknown. But life's wisdom unfolds in stillness, not in control. When you release attachment, you make room for truth to reveal itself in its own time. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes and you begin to trust the rhythm of life itself. To walk in clarity means to see both light and shadow in yourself and in others. It means accepting that not every connection is meant to stay And not every silence means rejection. Sometimes the space you fear is the very space that allows you to rediscover your strength. The moment you stop clinging, you begin to see the reality of the connection. Who is there because they choose to be, and who was there only because you held them tightly. Attachment creates blindness because it replaces observation with obsession. It narrows your awareness until everything revolves around one person, one desire, one outcome. But life is vast. The moment you loosen your grip, the world opens again. You begin to notice how much peace exists beyond the need to control. You start to sense the quiet wisdom of distance, the healing power of letting go, and the beauty that arises when love is no longer driven by fear. When attachment fades, vision returns. You start to see not only the other person more clearly, but also yourself, your patterns, your strength, your capacity to love without losing yourself. You begin to understand that true connection is not built through possession, but through presence. And presence cannot exist where there is blindness, because presence requires seeing, accepting, and allowing life to move as it must. Silence is not emptiness, it is a language of its own, deep, ancient, and powerful. It is the space where truth reveals itself without interference. In a world that constantly urges you to explain, justify, and prove, silence becomes a form of rebellion. It is not weakness or indifference, but presence in its purest form. When you choose silence, you are no longer reacting, you are observing. You are allowing what is false to dissolve and what is real to emerge. There is a silence that punishes, but there is also a silence that heals. The difference lies in intention. When silence is born from ego, it seeks to control. It withholds affection to gain power. But when silence arises from awareness, it becomes strength. A quiet clarity that does not need to fight, because it already understands. The silence that heals does not come from avoidance, it comes from mastery over reaction. It is the silence that watches without judgment, that listens without needing to speak. In relationships, words often lose their meaning when they are spoken too quickly, too emotionally, or too often. Words can be used to manipulate, to justify, or to defend, but silence cannot lie. It is honest even when it is uncomfortable. It reveals the energy between two people without the noise of explanation. When you stop speaking, you begin to feel. You start to notice the subtle tension, the unspoken truth, the distance that cannot be hidden behind words. Silence exposes what speech tries to cover. When you walk away and choose silence, the other person begins to face what they have been avoiding. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects their own behavior, their own choices, their own silence. This is why silence is powerful. It does not chase, it does not demand, it simply reveals. People often realize your value not when you speak louder, but when you stop speaking altogether. Because in that silence, they finally hear the echo of what they have lost. Silence teaches self-control. It shows you that not every emotion deserves expression. Not every conflict deserves reaction. When you learn to be silent, you learn to master your energy. You stop feeding situations that drain your peace. You stop arguing to be understood because you understand that truth does not need validation. The one who can remain silent in the face of chaos is the one who has learned the art of presence. Silence also deepens perception. It sharpens your awareness like the still surface of a calm lake, reflecting everything around it. When you speak less, you observe more. Not only others, but yourself. You begin to see how often words are used to escape stillness, how easily conversation becomes a distraction from emotion. In silence, you meet your own thoughts. You hear the noise within you that has been masked by constant activity. You discover the layers of your mind that you never noticed before, because silence holds up a mirror to your inner world. In moments of conflict, silence is not avoidance. It is the pause between reaction and understanding. It is the space where anger cools and wisdom enters. The person who can remain quiet in the heat of tension holds more power than the one who shouts to prove a point. Words can be forgotten or twisted, but silence lingers. It makes people reflect, question, and sometimes regret. Because silence, when rooted in peace, creates a presence that words can never match. There are times when silence becomes the highest form of communication. When you no longer explain your worth, your boundaries, or your intentions, your energy begins to speak for you. You no longer need to convince anyone of your value. Your calmness, your absence, your stillness, they all begin to convey what no speech can express. In that still energy, the truth becomes undeniable. You are no longer chasing understanding, you are embodying it. Silence also protects your energy. Every word you speak is an exchange of power. When you waste words on misunderstanding, gossip, or emotional reactions, you scatter your inner strength. Silence gathers it back. It centers you. It allows you to observe the situation without being pulled into the noise of others. The moment you choose silence over reaction, you reclaim your power. You stop feeding the drama, and the drama fades. You stop responding to provocation, and provocation loses its force. There is great wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to be silent. Speech has its time, but silence carries the depth of timelessness. Words belong to the surface of communication. Silence belongs to the depth of connection. When you sit in silence with someone and still feel understood, that is truth. When no words are needed and peace exists between two hearts, that is real connection. Everything else is noise created by fear and insecurity, trying to fill the space that silence would heal. Silence also reveals intention. When you are quiet, you notice who rushes to fill the space and who remains comfortable within it. You see who listens and who only waits to respond. You begin to understand who values presence over performance. This kind of awareness cannot be gained through words, because words distract, silence exposes. Even nature speaks through silence. The mountains do not speak, yet they command respect. The ocean does not shout, yet it holds power beyond measure. The trees do not argue, yet they continue to grow in peace. Everything that carries true strength moves in silence. It does not need to prove its worth, it simply exists in harmony with what is. The same applies to human energy. When your silence is grounded in self-respect, it becomes magnetic. It draws others toward you not because you are distant, but because your calmness feels safe. It is in your silence that others sense your boundaries, your peace, your maturity. They feel your presence more deeply when you are quiet than when you try to convince them with words. Silence, therefore, becomes a discipline. It teaches patience, awareness, and restraint. It reminds you that peace is not found through reaction, but through observation. When you learn to sit in silence, you learn to sit with truth, your truth, their truth, and the truth of the situation. And once you can sit with truth without running away, you no longer fear silence. You begin to respect it. You begin to use it as a tool for growth, clarity, and balance. In this way, silence becomes your greatest teacher. It shows you what your emotions hide. It reveals who values you without your effort. It strengthens your inner foundation so that even in the midst of noise, you remain centered. For when you no longer fear silence, you no longer fear being misunderstood, unseen, or alone. Silence becomes your strength, your boundary, and your truth spoken without words. There is a silent law that governs human connection. A law not of manipulation but of energy. When your energy is directed outward, when you are constantly giving, seeking, and chasing, you create imbalance. Energy flows toward where it is being spent. The more you invest it outward, the less you have within. And when your inner field becomes empty, others sense it. The pull that once drew them toward you begins to fade. But when you withdraw your energy not out of bitterness but awareness, something begins to shift. The energy that once leaked outward starts to return home. And as it does, it reawakens your power. Strangely, that is when the very attention you once craved begins to return as well. Energy is invisible, yet it is the foundation of all attraction. Every thought, emotion, and action carries energy. When your mind revolves around someone, thinking of them, wondering about them, reacting to their absence, you are sending energy toward them. Even if they are far away, this flow can be felt. It is the reason people sometimes pull back when you want them closer. They feel your focus as pressure, not presence. Your energy becomes a signal of attachment, and attachment repels more often than it attracts. The more you chase, the more they retreat, because the energy you send out says, I need you to complete me, and need always carries heaviness. When you withdraw that energy, you are not punishing or manipulating. You are reclaiming. You are taking back the attention that has been scattered across someone else's choices and redirecting it inward. This act changes your frequency. Your energy begins to feel lighter, freer, grounded. You are no longer broadcasting lack, you are radiating self-sufficiency, and people can feel that difference, even without words. It is the unseen force behind the paradox. When you no longer seek attention, attention naturally seeks you. Withdrawing your energy does not mean building walls or becoming cold. It means becoming conscious of where your thoughts go. Every time you think of them, imagine that you are sending them a current of energy. Ask yourself, is this current strengthening me or depleting me? Most often, it drains because the mind attaches to what it cannot control. The moment you shift your focus to yourself, your breath, your body, your goals, the energy begins to recycle. It no longer leaks outward into uncertainty, but circulates within you like water returning to its source. In this quiet inwardness, you start to glow differently. Your posture changes. Your eyes carry calmness. You move through life not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who already belongs to themselves. This energy cannot be faked because it is born from detachment. And detachment is not the absence of love, it is the presence of clarity. When you are no longer entangled in seeking validation, your energy feels clean, balanced, and magnetic. That is when others begin to feel the pull. Not because you are reaching for them, but because your silence and self-containment awaken their curiosity. The human heart is drawn to mystery, and mystery exists in space. When you constantly offer energy, there is no mystery. When you constantly explain, reach out, and express, the other person stops wondering. But when you pull back and rest in your own stillness, a space opens. And in that space, the mind of the other begins to wander. They start to remember your presence, your voice, your energy, the same energy they once took for granted. This is not magic, it is energetic balance restoring itself. Attention returns to where energy once flowed from, now purified by absence. Withdrawing energy is also a test of emotional discipline. It requires trust that you do not need to chase what aligns with you, and trust that silence does not mean loss. It requires awareness of your impulses, the desire to check, to reach out, to remind them of your existence. When those urges arise, it is the moment to pause and redirect. Turn that same energy into self-nourishment. Create, move, breathe, meditate. Every action of self-alignment increases your energetic vibration. And when your vibration rises, your presence speaks louder than any message you could send. The reason attention returns is not because they suddenly change, but because your energy changes. You are no longer vibrating from need, but from fullness. People are sensitive to energy even if they do not understand it consciously. They feel when someone is whole, when someone is peaceful in their own company. That kind of peace is rare, and rarity attracts naturally. The more you fill yourself, the more you magnetize your surroundings without effort. You become like the sun, not chasing anyone, yet everything turns toward you. The law of energy does not obey emotional desperation, it responds to equilibrium. The one who holds their energy inward commands attention not by effort, but by presence. You have likely felt this yourself. Someone enters a room quietly, yet all eyes turn toward them. It is not their words or actions, but the calm centeredness they radiate. They are not reaching outward, they are settled within. Their energy is complete, not leaking. And in that completeness lies their power. When you constantly give energy to someone who does not reciprocate, you drain your own field. They begin to sense that drain and unconsciously distance themselves. It is not rejection, it is energetic imbalance. But when you stop giving that energy away, the space between you becomes neutral again. The absence of your attention creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Attention, curiosity, and awareness begin to flow back toward you, as if pulled by gravity. Energy withdrawn is not about absence, it is about redirection. It is turning your focus from external reaction to internal restoration. It is remembering that the source of your power does not lie in someone else's recognition, but in your own alignment. When your energy belongs to you, you are no longer anxious about who notices or who doesn't. You become the one who notices yourself, and that awareness becomes the foundation of your magnetism. When you no longer fight for attention, you embody peace. That peace becomes your signal. It travels silently, reaching those who once ignored your presence. They begin to feel what they did not feel before, your stability, your groundedness, your distance that now feels like depth. What was once too available becomes valuable. What was once taken for granted becomes missed. The truth is, energy teaches others how to treat you. When your energy is scattered, you teach them that your focus is easily taken. When your energy is steady and reserved, you teach them that your attention is sacred. They learn that to have access to your energy is not a right, but a privilege. And privilege creates appreciation. That is why, when you withdraw your energy, attention naturally returns, not because you played a game, but because you restored balance. Every connection is an exchange. Every thought, every glance, every response is energy moving in one direction or another. When you become aware of this movement, you stop wasting it. You begin to choose where your focus goes, and where it doesn't, you no longer chase love because love begins to chase you. You no longer seek validation because validation begins to find you. The cycle reverses itself the moment you reclaim what was always yours, your energy, your attention, your power. Walking away is one of the most misunderstood acts in human experience. Many believe it is a sign of loss, of defeat, or of indifference. But in truth, walking away, when done from awareness and not anger, is not about leaving someone or something behind. It is about returning to the place you forgot while trying to hold everything else together yourself. It is an inward journey disguised as distance, a silent step back into alignment with your own soul. There comes a time in every connection where you begin to feel the imbalance. You sense yourself giving more than you receive, explaining more than is heard, waiting longer than is respected. You begin to notice how much of your peace depends on someone else's choices, and that realization is painful. It is in those moments that walking away becomes necessary, not as an act of punishment, but as an act of preservation. When you walk away, you are not turning your back on love, you are turning your face toward truth. To walk away is to recognize that love cannot grow in a space where self-respect is absent. It is to understand that silence sometimes heals more than conversation, that space sometimes teaches more than words. You walk away not because you no longer care, but because you care too deeply about what you are becoming. You realize that staying would mean betraying your own peace, dimming your own light, and losing your connection to what is real within you. Walking away then becomes an act of self-honoring. When you walk away consciously, you are not running, you are reclaiming. You are gathering back the fragments of your energy that were scattered in trying to please, to prove, to fix. You begin to see how much of yourself you had given away in the name of love, and you start to call it home. The body feels lighter, the mind grows clearer, the heart, though tender, begins to open again, not outward this time, but inward. You start to listen again to the quiet voice that was always there, whispering beneath the noisy, remember who you are. People often mistake walking away for ending something, but the truth is that it begins something else, the process of rediscovery. When you stop chasing what does not align with your peace, you start to uncover what truly nourishes it. You notice how much energy was spent in worry, how much emotion was invested in uncertainty, how much silence was filled with overthinking. And as that awareness grows, you begin to breathe differently. You start to realize that your worth was never dependent on being chosen, that your love was never meant to be begged for. You begin to move through life with quiet dignity instead of silent suffering. Walking away requires courage because it often means stepping into the unknown. It means letting go of control and allowing life to rearrange itself without your constant interference. It is a test of faith, not in others, but in yourself. You must trust that whatever you are leaving behind is not greater than what you are walking toward. You must believe that the peace waiting on the other side of detachment is more valuable than the comfort of familiarity. The fear of emptiness will try to hold you back, but emptiness is only the space that appears before renewal. When you walk away, you do not erase your love, you transform it. The love that was once directed outward begins to flow inward. You start nurturing yourself with the same compassion you once reserved for others. You begin to understand that love was never meant to make you small. Real love expands you. It allows you to be yourself fully without fear of losing someone. So when a connection begins to shrink you, when it begins to cost you your clarity, walking away becomes an act of love in its highest form. Love directed toward truth rather than attachment. To return to yourself is to return to balance. It means sitting in your own silence without needing distraction. It means learning to enjoy your own company, not as loneliness, but as presence. You start to notice how much peace exists in the stillness you once avoided. You begin to realize that solitude is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the ground where self-trust grows, where boundaries become clear, and where your heart learns to beat for its own rhythm again. When you walk away, others may not understand. Some may see distance as rejection. But what they do not see is the depth of your intention. You are not closing your heart, you are protecting its sacredness. You are not abandoning connection, You are creating space for a healthier one. Walking away is not about proving your strength to anyone. It is about remembering that your energy, your peace, and your time are sacred offerings. Not everyone is meant to receive them, and that truth does not make you unkind. It makes you awake. There is a deep wisdom in knowing when to stay and when to go. To stay when something still nurtures your soul is strength. To walk away when it no longer does is wisdom. Life will often test you with both. You will be asked to discern between loyalty and self-neglect, between patience and self-betrayal. Walking away becomes the answer when staying costs your authenticity. It is the moment you stop seeking permission to prioritize yourself. As you return to yourself, something profound happens. The world around you begins to respond differently. The relationships that drained you start to fade. The opportunities that align with your truth start to appear. You become lighter, more centered, more magnetic. The same energy that once reached outward for validation now radiates inward as confidence. You are no longer defined by who stays or who leaves. You are defined by the peace you choose to carry. To walk away is to step out of illusion and into awareness. It is the realization that love without respect is dependency, that attention without effort is illusion, that connection without honesty is bondage. When you walk away, you create space for something real, not necessarily from others, but from within yourself. You allow your energy to reorganize, your mind to reset, and your heart to remember that it was never incomplete. Walking away is not a statement of ending. It is a declaration of beginning. It is the moment you stop trying to be understood and start understanding yourself. It is the quiet realization that peace is not found in being accepted, but in being authentic. It is the slow return of your strength, the soft rebuilding of your spirit, and the gentle reminder that leaving what no longer aligns with your soul is not loss. It is liberation. It is you finally coming home to the one place you were always meant to belong, within yourself. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it is the presence of awareness, it is the space between thoughts, the quiet between breaths, the pause between reaction and understanding. In stillness, everything hidden begins to rise to the surface. The truth that noise conceals slowly unveils itself, not through effort, but through silence. The mind is constantly searching, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to control. But truth is not something to be chased. Truth is something that is revealed when the chase stops. In the stillness of your own being, the fog of confusion begins to clear. You begin to see things not as you want them to be, but as they are. This is why stillness feels uncomfortable for many, because when you finally stop running, you begin to hear the voices you have ignored. You hear your fears, your attachments, your hidden desires. You see the stories you have been telling yourself about who you are and what you need. Stillness shows you the mirror that movement keeps you from facing. It brings you face to face with your truth. The human mind fears stillness because it cannot control it. Movement gives the illusion of progress. Talking, thinking, planning, they all make you feel like you are doing something. But stillness demands surrender. It asks you to stop doing and start being. It asks you to sit in the space where there are no answers, no distractions, no validations. It is in that quiet where the layers of illusion begin to fall away. You begin to realize that the chaos outside was only a reflection of the noise within. When you allow yourself to be still, you begin to sense the subtle energy of life moving through you. You start to notice what you had been too busy to feel. The tension in your body, the heaviness in your chest, the way your thoughts repeat the same cycle again and again. You become aware of how often your actions come from fear rather than freedom. Stillness does not create truth. It simply reveals what was already there, waiting to be acknowledged. Stillness is a teacher, but it does not speak in words. Its lessons come through experience. When you sit in silence long enough, you begin to recognize patterns, not in others, but in yourself. You see how you react when faced with uncertainty, how you attach meaning to outcomes, how you use distraction to escape discomfort. The more you observe without judgment, the more clarity arises. Stillness becomes a light that shines through the fog of your conditioning, illuminating what is real and what is borrowed. In relationships, stillness has its own power. When conflict arises, the instinct is to respond, to explain, to fix. But sometimes the truth of a situation only reveals itself when you stop responding, when you remain still, not as an act of coldness, but as an act of awareness. You You begin to see who moves toward you and who drifts away. You see who values your presence and who values your reaction. Stillness separates what is genuine from what is dependent on your energy. It allows you to see with clarity who meets you in peace and who only thrives in chaos. Stillness is not about withdrawal from life, it is about engagement without attachment. It is the ability to participate fully in each moment while remaining anchored within. When you act from stillness, your actions are deliberate, not impulsive. When you speak from stillness, your words carry weight, not noise. When you listen from stillness, you begin to truly understand rather than simply hear. Stillness gives birth to wisdom because it connects you to the truth that lies beyond the surface of circumstance. Truth cannot be forced. It arrives in its own time, like the reflection of the moon appearing only when the surface of the lake is calm. The more the water is disturbed, the more distorted the reflection becomes. The same is true with the mind. When you are restless, emotional, or reactive, your perception becomes blurred. You see fragments, not the whole. But when you rest in stillness, perception becomes clear. You no longer see through fear or desire, you see through awareness, and awareness reveals everything as it is, without story, without exaggeration, without confusion. Stillness teaches patience. It shows you that clarity does not come through force, but through surrender. You learn to wait without anxiety, to observe without needing immediate resolution. This patience is not passive, it is active receptivity. It is a readiness to receive truth without resistance. In this space, life begins to communicate with you in subtle ways, through intuition, through synchronicities, through sensations that guide you more deeply than logic ever could. Most people search for truth outside themselves, in others, in experiences, in answers. But stillness turns your gaze inward. It asks you to sit with your feelings, to let them unfold without interference. It asks you to listen not with your ears, but with your being. And in that listening, you begin to realize that the truth was never hidden. It was simply drowned out by the noise of the mind. The moment you stop trying to control the outcome, the truth gently rises, clear and undeniable. In stillness, you remember that truth is not a concept, it is a vibration. It is felt in the body before it is understood by the mind. You feel the difference between peace and tension, between alignment and resistance. You begin to trust your own internal compass, rather than the opinions of others. You realize that truth is not always comfortable. It often asks you to release what you thought you needed, to let go of illusions that once gave you safety. But this discomfort is sacred. It is the cleansing before clarity. Stillness also brings healing. When the mind quiets, the body follows. The nervous system begins to settle. The breath deepens and energy starts to flow freely again. You begin to feel connected, not to a person or idea, but to life itself. The separation between you and everything else begins to dissolve. From that space, compassion arises naturally. You see that everyone is doing the best they can within their own level of awareness. Stillness does not just reveal truth about yourself, it reveals truth about existence. There is power in being still when the world demands reaction. It is in that pause that you reclaim your clarity, your peace, your sovereignty. Stillness allows you to respond rather than react, to create rather than control. It gives you the ability to see beyond appearances and feel the deeper movements beneath them. It teaches you that truth is never loud. It does not shout, it whispers. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. When you become comfortable with stillness, you no longer fear uncertainty. You no longer chase validation or cling to outcomes. You begin to trust the quiet rhythm of life, that everything unfolds exactly as it should, in its own time. The truth that stillness reveals is not just about others or circumstances, it is about yourself. Who you are beneath all roles, all masks, all noise. It shows you that peace was never something to be found. It was something to be remembered. And remembrance only happens in the stillness where all illusions fade and only truth remains. Freedom is the breath of the soul. It is the invisible force that allows desire to come alive without fear, without control, without resistance. When there is no freedom, desire suffocates. It becomes tangled in need, in attachment, in fear of loss. But when freedom is present, desire transforms. It becomes lighter, purer, deeper. It is no longer a hunger to possess, it becomes a movement of appreciation. To understand desire, one must first understand the sacred role of freedom. Because freedom is not the opposite of love, it is the soil in which true love grows. Desire in its purest form is not about ownership. It is the natural pull of life toward beauty, connection, and expression. It is the longing of the heart to experience itself through another. Yet when fear enters, that longing begins to twist. It becomes desperate, dependent, anxious. You begin to want not because you are full, but because you feel empty. You start to seek the other not as an extension of joy, but as an escape from loneliness. This is not true desire. It is attachment wearing the mask of love. And attachment always leads to suffering because it tries to cage what is meant to be free. Freedom, however, changes the entire vibration of desire when you feel free within yourself, free from the need for validation, free from fear of rejection, free from the illusion of control. Your desire becomes clean. It is no longer driven by what you lack, but by what you wish to share. You no longer cling to the outcome. You simply allow the feeling to flow. You no longer try to hold someone. You allow them to move as they must. In that allowance, a strange and beautiful thing happens. Desire deepens. What you once tried to control, you now begin to respect. And what you respect, you begin to attract. Freedom awakens desire because it restores polarity. It creates space. And in that space, attraction breathes. When two people are constantly entangled, when there is no distance, no individuality, desire fades. Familiarity kills curiosity, and predictability kills attraction. But when there is freedom, there is movement. You see the other person not as yours, but as a mystery that continues to unfold. You begin to desire not because you fear losing them, but because their freedom reminds you of your own. This is the paradox of love. When you stop holding too tightly, the connection becomes stronger. When you no longer need constant reassurance, the bond becomes more natural. The energy between two people becomes alive again because it is not trapped by control. Freedom allows desire to renew itself continuously. It keeps the connection fluid, organic, and evolving. Love without freedom becomes routine. Love with freedom becomes art. Freedom also reveals whether desire is real or merely illusion. When you release control, you discover who stays because they choose to and who was only there because they felt obligated. When you stop chasing, those who value your essence remain drawn to you. Those who were feeding on your energy drift away. This clarity is the gift of freedom. It filters the genuine from the false without confrontation, without effort. It allows truth to separate itself quietly. True freedom in connection requires deep trust, not in the other person, but in yourself. It is the trust that no matter what happens, you will remain whole. That your peace does not depend on anyone's presence, and your worth does not depend on being chosen. When this trust is alive within you, desire becomes fearless. You no longer desire out of lack, you desire out of fullness. You no longer seek someone to complete you, you seek someone to share your completeness with. This is when love becomes an act of choice, not a reaction to loneliness. Freedom also brings awareness to how much of your desire is conditioned. The world teaches you to chase, to prove, to win affection. But genuine desire is quiet. It does not compete. It flows from authenticity, not strategy. When you live freely, you begin to notice that what truly attracts is not effort, but energy. The calm confidence of someone at peace with themselves is far more magnetic than the constant reaching of someone seeking validation. Freedom makes your energy lighter, more radiant, more open. And in that openness, desire finds its natural rhythm. In relationships, freedom is the sacred space between two souls. It is the invisible breath that keeps connection alive. Without it, love becomes suffocating. With it, love becomes infinite. It means allowing the other person to explore, to grow, to change, and trusting that their growth does not threaten your connection. It means not measuring affection by closeness, but by respect. True intimacy is not found in constant presence, but in the freedom to return to each other again and again by choice. Desire awakened by freedom feels different. It is not a flame that burns uncontrollably, consuming both in its heat. It is a steady fire that warms without destroying. It carries curiosity rather than fear, attraction rather than desperation. You no longer chase attention because your energy radiates naturally. You no longer demand love because love flows toward peace. Freedom gives you that peace, and peace makes you magnetic. The greatest mistake people make is believing that holding tighter creates security. But holding tighter often creates distance. Control repels what freedom invites. When you grasp too hard, energy stiffens and desire withers. But when you let go, when you allow things to unfold with trust, energy begins to flow again. Freedom opens the gate for desire to return on its own terms, purified by space and silence. In stillness and freedom, everything finds its rightful place. You begin to see that you never truly lost what was meant for you. You only lost what was not aligned with your truth. Freedom brings this understanding naturally. It teaches that love cannot be forced, and attraction cannot be maintained by fear. It must be allowed to breathe, to move, to evolve. What is real will grow stronger in freedom. What is false will dissolve in it. Freedom also transforms your relationship with yourself. You stop chasing experiences to feel alive because you begin to realize that aliveness is your natural state. You stop searching for someone to ignite your desire because your desire begins to rise from within, from your creativity, your stillness, your joy, your awareness. You start to live from a place of openness rather than emptiness. The more you honor your freedom, the more life responds with abundance. Freedom awakens desire because it restores balance. It allows energy to circulate instead of stagnate. It removes the tension of need and replaces it with the ease of being. It reminds you that what you give space to grows, and what you try to cage eventually fades. Desire is meant to move freely, to come and go like breath, to flow like the tide. When you stop trying to control it, you begin to experience its true beauty, not as chaos, but as harmony. In the end, freedom and desire are not opposites, they are reflections of each other. Desire without freedom becomes possession, and freedom without desire becomes isolation. But when the two meet in balance, they create the highest form of connection. One where love breathes easily, where passion remains alive, and where both souls can move freely without fear of losing themselves in one another. It is in that space of freedom that desire wakes from its sleep, not as a craving, but as a quiet, powerful remembrance of life's most sacred truth, that love was always meant to be free.